Good afternoon, everyone. This is the October 27th, 2020 meeting of the City Finance Committee. May I get a roll call for our committee members, please?
Yes, committee member Alejandro Gutierrez. Member Gutierrez. Okay. Committee member Megan Harmon.
Here.
Great. And committee chair Eric Friedman.
Here. Thank you. We have a quorum, so we will proceed. So before we get to today's agenda item, I will open it up for public comment for any items not on the agenda for public comments. I'm looking to see, I don't see any hands raised. Ms. Nicholson, do you see any?
No.
See any? Okay, thank you. So I will not see any public comment for items not on the agenda. I will close public comment. And now I will turn it over to our new finance director. First, I want to welcome you, Mr. DiMartini. It's great to have you on board here at the city. And this is your first finance committee meeting, so we're happy to have you here and welcome you. And so for our first item, I will turn it over. I believe it's Mr. Hamilton, but if you'd like to say a few words, Mr. DiMartini, feel free as well. And the item will be the water rates update.
Great. Thank you so much, Committee Chair Friedman. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Keith DiMartini, the new Finance Director, and I will be chairing this committee for you and the other council members. There is one item on the agenda today for your consideration. The subject is the water rates update. And the recommendation is that the Finance Committee will receive an update on the development of water rates for fiscal years 2022, 2023, and 2024. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Hamilton to deliver the staff's presentation this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. DiMartini, Chair Friedman, members of the committee, Malcolm Hamilton. I'm a Water Resources Financial Officer, here today to give an update on our general water rates planning. As you can imagine, for everyone and nearly everything, what we were planning on doing with water rates at the start of 2020 is different than what we're planning on doing now, and of course, largely due to COVID-19 impacts and how that's impacted our planning environment. Next slide, please. So while we get that switched over, I'm going to be going through a few things today for the presentation. So first, really I want to start with a background and really talk about the public meetings we've done since the start of the year with water rates, and look at Water Commission meetings and Finance Committee and City Council. Briefly touch on financial planning. So what were we looking at pre-COVID, and also what are some of the COVID impacts we've actually seen in the last quarter of FY20 and what's going on now kind of at the beginning of fiscal year 2021. I have a quick slide on the actual rate study, where we are in the process and what we're planning on doing in the next couple months. I want to spend some time on capital planning. As the staff report mentioned, a large component of what we've been able to do is resequence and somewhat restructure our capital plan, which was the outcome of a major effort within our work groups, and that's allowed us to get a little breathing room on the rates. And I'll go into more detail on that as we get into the presentation. And then ultimately what the rates update is for fiscal year 21, the current fiscal year that we're in, and also what we're looking at for the next 3 years, so the 2022, 23, and 24 fiscal years, and then a couple next steps. Next slide, please. So throughout the year, we've been doing a lot of communication, public communication on water rates, particularly with Water Commission. Starting back in February, this is kind of our pre-COVID period. We were looking at major policy issues, refining some of our rate revenue estimates, and planning at that time to have rates adopted in June of this year and go into effect in July. Of course, once COVID hit, that really made a lot of the assumptions in our rate model not very meaningful, particularly in terms of water demand and what those impacts were going to be on rate revenue. So what we decided to do was put a pause on further developing rates and really put a lot of effort into estimating the COVID impacts. And so in April and May, we were at Water Commission 2 times at Water Commission talking about COVID impacts, looking at a variety of scenarios where we tweaked our capital program. So we were looking at potentially capital cuts depending on how large the revenue impacts were going to be. We brought a very similar presentation to Finance Committee in April and also looked at scenarios and the preliminary estimates of COVID impacts. And then really in May, we came to City Council and said, what's best right now is to wait. We need more information to really fully develop a plan. And what we were tentatively planning to do at the time during our departmental budget presentation was a mid-year 3% increase on water rates. So that would be rates that go into effect in January 2021. Of course, as we outlined in the staff report, we're recommending that we do not do a water rate increase this fiscal year, but I'll explain more about how we get to that point from where we've been. And then just most recently, kind of stepping back up here, we were at Water Commission in September, giving a similar presentation to this one, apprising them of the most recent developments for water rates. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick look back at where we were in February of this year. We were going to Water Commission. Our consultant had looked at all of our financial needs and determined that we were going to need 6% increases annually, annual increases of 6% for 3 years, so 21, 22, and 23. The primary cost driver, so the cost that was driving these annual 6% increases were capital infrastructure needs. And it's important to understand that the capital improvement plan at the time, before we had really been able to develop this newer capital plan, was somewhat heavily front-loaded with projects. So we saw more funding needs in years 1 through 3 and 1 through 5 than that we're seeing now that have kind of been spread out over time. Our secondary drivers are general inflation. So we typically see in the water fund, cost of doing business sees an increase of about 3 to 3.5% per year. That's just a steady climb of inflation that we expect and anticipate. And then really to kind of a third degree, the tertiary driver would be staffing changes to better manage some of our changing business practices. But this had a pretty minor effect overall, however worth noting. And ultimately, the 6% increases relied also on the use of available reserves. And those would buffer some otherwise higher rate increases at the time. So again, this is where were we in February? This is what we're looking at. Now, if we can go to the next slide, talk about actual financial impacts from COVID. There's a distinction here between 2 different periods. So I'd like to just compare what we were looking at in FY20 at the last quarter. So this is April, May, and June of this year. And then what are we looking at now in FY21, the first quarter? So July, August, September. Well, we go back to FY20 with the governor's stay-at-home order and really some of the most intense months of COVID-19, we saw a pretty sharp decline in our commercial water demand. And ultimately, at the end of FY20, we finished about $3.7 million below what we had budgeted in rate revenues. So a pretty significant drop in rate revenues. Now, it was a twofold reasoning there, so one of which is conservation was a little higher than we anticipated, but the majority of the impact really came from this decline in commercial water demand, so it was the revenue impacts from COVID-19. We were able to largely offset those revenue reductions with operating expenditure reductions to match those. So we were able to defer some non-essential spending temporarily to better match our revenues with expenditures in FY20. I think the point here is what's the mindset at the end of FY20 and is revenues are not doing well. We are not sure when and if there will be a rebound in commercial demand and how long that will take to happen. So at the time, what you're hearing staff saying is we are going to need some sort of rate increase in FY21 to keep the water fund financially stable and able to meet all of our obligations. Now, if we turn to FY21, the first quarter of FY21, what are we seeing? So what we've seen in the last 3 months is a partial rebound in commercial demand. So it's not quite where we were last year, but definitely picked up from the lows of April. And we've seen upticks in residential water usage. This is to be expected. You know, people every day take their water demand from their home to their offices and to restaurants, and a lot of that has just water demand has just stayed at home. So this was somewhat expected, but we have seen a noticeable uptick in residential usage. That has driven rate revenues higher than we had expected. So we right now in the water fund are on track to meet or slightly exceed the budgeted number for rate revenue. We also had put into place some one-time capital cuts for FY21. This helped bolster our available reserves in case we continue to see degradation of our rate revenues. And we continue, of course, to closely monitor our operating expenditures. So trying to pace our expenditures with the revenues that are coming in to make sure that we're not getting out ahead of them. I would say we're cautiously optimistic. We're seeing kind of hints of optimism in the revenue categories, at least from a financial planning perspective. And that further lends itself to why we're recommending not doing a rate increase in FY21 because of these developments in the first quarter. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk quickly about the rate study that's going on. We had contracted with HDR Engineering back in October of 2019. They are doing a comprehensive financial analysis of the water fund, including a cost of service rate study. And this will do two things. It will ensure that we have sufficient revenues to meet all of our financial obligations, and also ensure that we're consistent with the Proposition 218 guidelines. If you look on the right here, the 3 steps that you see are, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback noise there, universal steps to rate setting. So this is industry standard. It's what the city follows as well. There's a revenue requirement component. So how much do you need to generate in revenues to meet all your financial obligations? We have largely completed that step. We're coming here today really working on the second step in the rate study, cost of service analysis. So this is taking the revenue requirement, allocating it to our different customer classes. And then in the next couple months, through kind of the new year, we'll be working on rate design. So how do we collect the revenue requirement in each different class? Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we had been to council in May, and that was during the departmental budget presentation. And at the time, we were looking at a mid-year 3% increase. Well, you know, if I may offer just a silver lining to the disruption of COVID, was it was giving us more time to analyze our capital improvement plan. And we were able to complete a major planning effort, the Water Distribution Infrastructure Plan. This involved our water distribution group, engineering, water supply. And what it really does is take a longer term look at our capital improvement plan and will guide our investments in the water system. Kind of 3 points there. It will improve the reliability, redundancy, and operational flexibility of the water system with this prudent planning. It helps us meet council's goal of replacing 2% of the water mains every year and plan for the expenditures that go along with that. And then really finally and fundamentally, it's a plan that supports reliable and safe drinking water service to all of our customers. Now, as I explained earlier, our original capital plan had kind of front-loaded some of these capital project costs in this near term. And so what we were seeing is the need, one, to overcome the capital expenditures and also these potential COVID impacts. So we needed a 3% increase at mid-year. Well, what the WDIP has done is spread the projects out over time. And so what we see is a better sequencing of projects and ultimately less of a need in the near term to have a rate increase. We're still increasing our investment in our physical assets over time, but the trajectory has lowered slightly. And so we can build up these rate increases more gradually over many more years than we had originally anticipated. And this is really fundamentally how we get from at the beginning of the year, where we're looking at a 6% increase, to how we get to now recommending no rate increase for FY21, largely a component of our capital improvement planning, a major effort by staff. Next slide, please. So when we look at what the WDIP has done for our rate planning, we are recommending as staff that we forego a water rate increase for fiscal year 21. It's great and coincidental that we can restructure the capital improvement plan, which has allowed us to not do a rate increase in 21, and also at the same time provide some relief to the community because of all the financial uncertainty and impacts that COVID has had on all of our customers. But we're doing this kind of in three ways is this made possible. The WDIP has essentially reduced our cash outlays, or planned cash outlays in the next several years, and spread those out over time. We're seeing some increasing revenue. So at the beginning of the year, we had not yet executed the water supply agreement with Montecito Water District. Beginning in FY22, it will provide approximately $4 million in annual revenues to the city. Now that that's executed, we can count on that. It's a stable revenue in the rate model, and has also helped us get to a point where we can not recommend rates for 21, rate increases for fiscal year 21. And then finally, with the help of our rate consultant who evaluated our debt coverage, they found that it's possible to retire some debt in the next several years, and also then replace that with new debt obligations that will further take the pressure off of our pay-as-you-go capital program, or cash-funded capital program. An important note that I want to make today is that we have not noticed the mid-year rate increases, so there is no obligation to carry forward with a public hearing, and there would be no other action needed by City Council to not go forward with the rate increase in fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. So that's fiscal year 21. Kind of turning to the next 3 years, our consultant will be before council and finance committee, but what they're recommending now is, yes, we can forego a rate increase in fiscal year 21. We can't do that going forward. It's really a kind of a one-time deal. They're going to recommend that we adopt rates for a 3-year schedule still. It would just be fiscal years 22, 23, and 24. And again, from that capital planning effort that spread the projects out over time and kind of reduced our annual capital investment need, we're looking at about 5% annual increases in rate revenue going forward. The other thing I'd like to mention, and we're just getting started on this effort, but the consultant had an optional task that we've triggered and decided to initiate, which was looking at a customer assistance program or programs. And so this may be anything such as discounts, new payment arrangements, all sorts of different types of programs that can help customers. And so our consultant right now is researching these programs, looking at what the administrative burden is and what it takes to administer that type of cap, so to speak. What would the funding sources be? And are there any potential partnerships with other organizations in the city to administer a customer assistance program? And then finally, last slide, please. Looking at the next steps going into the winter of 2021, we'll be giving presentations to the Water Commission on the proposed rates. We would, as of now, tentatively plan to be before Finance Committee once in about the April time period, and presenting proposed rates at that time as well. And then finally, in June of 2021, coming back to City Council for a public hearing with new rates to go into effect July 2021. And I should just note, understandably, 5% increases annually are less than what we had planned initially, but still for some community members, may be difficult. And so if the Finance Committee recommends, or you would like to see more public communication on this, we're very much open to that in the spring 2021 timeframe. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for the presentation. At this point, I will open it up to my colleagues for any questions of Mr. Hamilton regarding the presentation today. I don't see any. I did have a question. It's more just to reiterate, is that this year that we're currently in, there will be, since there's no rate increase, how are we communicating to the public this year? Because there was, City Council had adopted the 3% as part of our budget last year. Are we communicating now that there's no rate increase this year? Or is that going to be part of the April, when we go in April, that there wasn't one this past year?
Yeah, Chair Friedman, largely right now communicating through these means. So this meeting with Finance Committee, we have regular meetings with Water Commission as well. There's a potential also to use the water bill insert as a means of communicating with nearly all of our customers.
Great. I think it's important for the public to understand that there is no rate increase this year, and that we were able to take proactive measures, and then also to reduce our costs, but also have a plan to just amortize our capital improvement investments. And the last question I had before I open up for any public comment is in terms of the debt that we're going to be having. We're retiring, as I understand it, we're retiring previous debt, so we're trying to match those numbers as much as we can. So we're not going to be taking on a lot of extra debt. It's more within what we already have because those others are retiring. Is my understanding correct?
Chair Freeman, that's correct. The net increase in our debt levels will be minimal when we retire and then issue or take on new obligations.
That's good news. So I don't see any other questions at this point, so I will open it up to public comment on this item. And I'm looking to see, is there any public comments for this item?
Chair Friedman, I'm not seeing any public comment.
Okay, great. I will close public comment, and I will once again open up to my colleagues, Council Members Harmon and Gutierrez, on any comments that you have on this item. Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'm just going to reiterate much of what you said. I really appreciate this presentation and the work that staff did to put us in a position to not have to raise water rates this year. I think this was a really important effort and really shows your concern for our residents and what they're going through in this difficult period. So want to express my appreciation sincerely. And also echo, what Chair Friedman said about communication, to the extent that we can be proactive about communicating, whether it's via the water bill or social media, or however it is, both about the fact that rates are not going to be raised this year, as well as the anticipated rate increases coming up. I know I hear from a lot of my neighbors that even beyond sort of the increase itself, there's a real premium placed on knowing in advance when those changes are going to come. So you put it to us whether that's something that I think we would want. And I'm just going to answer that by saying yes, very much so, both the lack of increase now and then in the spring coming up, the anticipated increases. So folks can really plan their finances. I think that's more important now than ever. And with that, just thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank staff as well, and I'm really excited to share this news with my constituents. I think everybody is going to be very happy to hear that the water rates are not going to go up. And so thank you so much to staff for this really nice detailed presentation. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. And Mr. Hamilton, I once again want to thank you for your presentation. My comments are in line with my colleagues, and really getting the word out that there's no rate increase this year, but there will be. We're looking at it. But I think communicating the reasons why, especially that we're investing in our capital improvement program, and the water main replacements, the water replacement is a community priority, and it used to be 1%, if that, and now we're doing 2%, and we're being able to maintain that. And that is huge because I think that is a big concern of many in the community. So To tie that into the future rate increases that we're continuing with that program at an expedited pace, I think will go a long ways towards people understanding why we need to have those extra rate increases. So, but thank you for all your work and for everything that you did this year, you and the staff, to make it possible to not have a rate increase this year when a lot of families and businesses are struggling. So with that, I don't believe there's any other agenda items, and you don't need any direction today. So this is just an informational item. So I will adjourn this meeting of the Finance Committee meeting. Thank you.